Hey, my name is S.T.O.R.Y. I live in Concord, New Hampshire. I live in Ward 1. I'm the lead organizer for Change for Concord, and I do work with some organizations. Before I introduce to my partner, the person that we're going to be kind of talking to each other, I am going to introduce the show. I think it's important for us as community organizers to talk about the issues we have in our community, and we want to kind of start talking about the things we care about in our community as community organizers, the things that we want to see change in our community, and we want to talk about belonging today. So it's important that as people who do the work in our community, to share with the community, to educate our community what belonging looks like in our community, what we think, what we feel about belonging in our community. And we understand that Concord still is divided in some ways, and it's very important for us to come down and talk to each other and have a conversation about what changes that needs to happen. So before we move on, I am going to introduce to my partner. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Sharm, and I am the founder and executive director of Project S.T.O.R.Y. It's an organization that empowers new American youth in Concord, and I'm excited to be here today talking about belonging in Concord.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining.
Yes.
So we're just going to have a conversation, and I just wanted to start from my experience that I think it's very important that we get into these topics and start sharing information like what do we know, as people who are engaged in organizing, mostly younger adults, young people in our community, in school districts. What do we know, and what do we think that the community needs in terms of belonging? From my perspective or my understanding is that we've started to learn that belonging, when students or young people feel that they belong in the community, the more they succeed. And for the community or the school, predominantly like white and mostly black people are marginalized, or new Americans are marginalized. I think it's important to get into these topics like belonging and see what exactly going on and why some students can succeed and others can't succeed. There's a lot of reasons behind that, but I think that mostly when students or young people feel they belong in the community, they belong in the system, the more they succeed. So I would want to give you a mic and talk more about what your work is, like what you do with young people and how you help young people, and what you see in that area, like how does that play in your organization, in your work?
Sure. So all of the kids in my organization are new Americans, so they're all non-white. So every single one of my kids is dealing with the issue of belonging in our community. So belonging in their school might look a little bit different than belonging in their community, but ultimately it's the same feeling of I'm part of this world, I'm safe, I feel confident to be who I am, and that's just a great feeling that's going to help me succeed. It's going to propel me to different levels or different paths that I might not be on. So belonging is a really important piece for all kids to have. To feel safe and to prosper and to become empowered and to become these great leaders that they're going to become. Unfortunately, in Concord right now, there is not an environment that is 100% inclusive where everybody feels like they belong. Right. Specifically because I work with new American youth, I have been exposed to and seen and told about all of the feelings that they don't belong. Of course, there are certain situations where they feel like they do belong, but we need to focus on feelings and parts of their society and parts of their world where they feel like they don't belong. Those are the pieces where I feel like that need to be fixed, where we can fix those pieces. So we're seeing kids have issues with belonging and being part of their world and feeling safe and secure in school, in their community, like at the park or at the library or just out and about at the store,
Right.
as well as, as well as policies by their leaders and the
Right.
leadership that's being implemented. So I feel like this conversation is good because we need to talk about belonging. That's where we start. And then we can maybe talk about the different areas where belonging is so important and maybe how that's different and what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, and I think that when we talk about belonging, mostly what comes into the conversation, which I've had conversation with some specific people, mostly things that comes in conversation is that we talk about leadership, political. I mean, our local city government, I would say, as city councilors. We talk about the school district system, education system in general. We talk about officials. We talk about educators. Like when belonging is not part of the strategy, when those kind of concepts are not part of the strategy, I feel like we're missing a huge part of education that young people needs in the community, in the school district, to be able to succeed and to feel comfortable and to feel confident to do things in schools, to succeed, to learn, and to feel like they can actually thrive in schools. When there's a lack of education and resources, I would say mostly educational resources, where students can feel comfortable talking to their educators or teachers about how they feel about, around other students, mostly students of color, where they would want to speak about how they feel about around other students. They would want to speak about how they feel around the community. They would want to speak about how they feel about education in general, or what they know, how they experiences it is about education. I think we would be missing a huge part of education that most students needs to be able to succeed. And when students are not having a better education around, around the things that makes them unique, then they tend to feel like they blame themselves.
Correct.
They start blaming themselves,
Right.
and they feel like they're not comfortable or confident in the education. And I think that all comes like it kind of have a lot to do with belonging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Belonging isn't just about seeing yourself doing things in school, seeing yourself be able to have a job, or to feel like you have everything you need, money to go to school. Or I think it's more like having to get the resources you need in terms of education.
Absolutely.
Having to
Yeah.
have someone, an educator, a teacher, who understands your background, who
Right.
understands your language,
Right.
who understands your issues. So that's what makes young people feel that they belong. That creates a sense of belonging in our community. And I think that's like educational piece that our community, mostly Concord, needs right now to be able to
Yes.
bridge the gap we have. And we're gonna keep sharing more about like resources that we have in our community. What kind of resources do we need? What kind of education we need to be able to create a path for students, mostly marginalized students, to feel like they can succeed. But I wanna make sure that I can also share my time with you and see what you guys you comment about that.
Well, I like that you brought up school because I feel like the schools do a really good job in keeping that in mind. Like we need to make sure everybody feels like they belong, right? Everybody feels inclusive. That's a great concept to talk about. However, I'm not sure that that has been 100% implemented in the school. So maybe people feel, maybe we can say everybody's, feeling like they belong, but that's not how it is right now. So another thing too that I've noticed is, the schools, and they might have resources for things like this, but the bottom line is too, is it's different for white people to belong in this culture, in this society, in our school, than it is maybe for new Americans to belong. So what that means is they might need different resources. New Americans might need different resources at school than white kids. And that's just a fact. That's just the way that it is, the way that our society is structured. And if those new American kids aren't getting those resources that they need, then they're not going to feel like they belong. And they're not going to be successful. And they're not going to feel empowered. And they could just go down a different path, right? So it's really important that we do have resources in the school for these things and to make sure that everybody feels like they belong. And I love that you brought up education, because I think that ultimately that's what it comes down to, is educating everyone, educating our young people, educating our leaders and our teachers, and educating our whole community about these issues, and to make sure that everybody feels like they can belong. Because ultimately, when everybody feels safe, we all feel safe, and that is what we want to happen.
Right.
So if we start with educating everybody, that's how we start. That's how we get this started. But right now, there's not really an educational curriculum, I would say, or workshops or anything that really touches on these topics and unifying the community and just belonging and being safe and proud to be yourself in an environment. I don't really see much of that curriculum being implemented in the schools and in our community. So that I think is something that we really need to focus on, and we need to bring education and we need to bring resources into our schools, into our community, to make sure that everybody does feel like they belong. Because you're absolutely right. If you don't feel like you belong, if you don't feel like you can belong, or if you're in an environment or in a school where they don't have things that you can relate to, or they don't have books you can read, or you're not seeing pictures of people that look like you, that might send a negative message to you. And growing up, we don't want kids to think negative about themselves, especially because of what they look like or where they came from. So we need to create that feeling and that community of belonging, and we do that by starting with education and by making sure that everybody has that education and the resources that they need. So that would be the first great step.
And also, most importantly, is that we need to understand that being a new American or a student of color doesn't mean all the students of color need same thing.
Correct.
They all have different needs. And I've seen this before, where our school system or the community in general, they're trying to provide one thing that is going to be a solution to the needs or to the things that they need, which is not true. Like we need to understand that it's going to take a lot of things, a lot of resources, different ways, different paths of doing to be able to provide the things that are needed for students, for young people to succeed, to prepare them for the world. We have to understand that these students can also succeed in many different paths, career-wise. They also have different dreams. It's not that, they all need to learn English, or they all need to understand whatever these bigger careers or programs like CRTC or anything. Like they all need different paths. So we have to provide the required resources to be able to help everybody in their way, like how they want to see their community look like, how they want to see the school look like. And also, mostly, I would want to make sure that we use our time wisely. I just want to make sure that we we make sure that we can speak about the things that are needed. But most importantly, I think more about the requirements. The requirements. Also, one thing I've realized that when we start trying to create resources for students to help students, mostly marginalized communities, students of color, we think that they all need one thing. They all need same thing, which is not true. We need to realize that all the students have their own dreams, and we have to provide required education, things that they need to be able to succeed and to do things differently, however they want. And this is mostly when we don't have resources that would help to prepare these students for like success, is that we see a lot of students graduate from high school, but when they go out, instead of studying college or instead of participating in college, they start working. They go to find jobs, and that's and after that, like the results is that we find students getting in trouble in many ways, and violence and a lot of issues happen because we were not able to provide educational materials or the things that they need to be able to prepare them for the world. But most important is that, you know, we will need to talk about the requirements for education, for bigger opportunities, for something like CRTC, for either bigger opportunities that students needs to be able to succeed, or to just have same education just like anybody, or have same opportunities just like anybody else. And those are things that we need to dig deep and talk about and figure out what the issue is. But I know you have a lot that you would want to share about that. Like, but I do have a story that I did participate in the CRTC, like in high school, when I was in high school. And that, like, CRTC is a great opportunity for students who want to start their career earlier, like, and be able to prepare for college, which is great. I did something, and it kind of helped me a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what are the requirements? You know, who is part of it? Like, how can we help more students, mostly new Americans, to be able to participate in those kind of opportunities? It's not just CRTC. We're talking about a lot of different opportunities. And before I even step into those kind of things, the conversation, but I just want to make sure you understand that everybody understands that this is also part of creating an environment where students feel that they belong.
Correct. Yeah.
Because if they can't participate in these bigger programs because of maybe they're not accessible because of the requirements, or because they can't speak English, because they can't read well, or because they can't write well, then that's a big issue. That makes a lot of students feel like they don't belong in a space.
Right.
And the requirements would need to be more flexible.
Yeah.
For everybody.
Right.
So I want to hand the mic to you.
I mean, I agree with that. I think that we do need more resources. We definitely need more resources in our school and our community. Even in school, you know, I constantly hear from the kids issues that might be going on, and one quick fix that the kids always give is, well, we just need more staff, like hire more staff. Well, let's do that then. You know what I mean? I know that's a quick, easy fix, you know, for some people, more complicated than others because staff costs money. But
Right.
the bottom line is that kids need services so that they feel like they belong. And you're right, kids need different things. So the fact is, if there's one person dealing with marginalized groups or two people dealing with marginalized groups, that's just not enough. So I think we need to make a conscious effort as a community when we're focusing on the school and the community to really make sure that kids and everybody in the community feels that they belong and feels that they, you know, have the right to education. Because you're right, everybody deserves the right to education. But if you're in an environment where you feel like you don't belong,
Right.
just that fact alone might prevent you from getting the education that you
Right.
deserve.
Right.
So if we really make a conscious effort to make sure that those resources and that education is in our systems, then that's how those things are going to get better. And that's how we create a culture of belonging so that everybody feels like they belong and can be successful and feel safe.
Yeah, and also the idea of engagement in the community.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunities. We want to see young
Right.
people participate in a lot of bigger things in our community.
Right.
To feel like they belong in the community.
Right.
They belong in Concord. They can own things in Concord.
Right.
They can take on bigger responsibilities.
Right.
And one thing I've learned, by the way, participating in the city government, working with the city councilors and engaging with a lot of community leaders,
Yeah.
getting to learn from everybody, is when I take that knowledge to schools, talking to students, or sharing my experience with the city, or sharing my experience with how the system works, or what my story, like how I think about the community, my understanding. They tend to not understand. They tend to not get the idea of why this, why do we still have a city that is divided? Why do we still have issues around access to resources? Why do we still have all those kind of issues? Why do we still have racism in our community? Why do we still have discrimination and violence? I realize is that students have to understand what racism looks like, what discrimination looks like,
Right.
and understand how to prevent or to prevent that from happening to them, or
Right.
to protect themselves from that.
Correct.
To be able to feel that they belong.
Right.
And you can see that there's a responsibility there.
Absolutely.
So before we even engage our students or young adults
Yep.
to participate in a lot of bigger things in our city, to feel like they belong in the city and they can do things in our city and they can be a part of working with our organizations, or having jobs in our city, or having big opportunities that they need, is that they have to understand that area.
Correct.
They have to understand what does it look like
Right.
to be discriminated.
Right.
And that creates a new world for them to feel that they belong.
Correct.
So,
yes.
talking about the city, I know you've worked with some of the organizations a lot, and the fact that you own an organization and working with young people, there's a lot to that
Yeah.
I don't want to take more time and just...
Sure. So when we jump to the city in these feelings of belonging and making sure that everybody has access and that everybody feels like they belong, that was really the reason why I started Project S.T.O.R.Y, was because we had kids in our community, many kids from marginalized groups, that weren't feeling like they belonged because they didn't have access to something simple like after school sports. That might be silly for some kids, but for some kids that could be their world. And so when they don't have access to something that other kids have that they might want to do, that can create a feeling of I don't belong here.
Right.
So that's why I started Project S.T.O.R.Y, was to basically get those barriers knocked down and to create these environments where everyone can belong and where everybody does have access to those things that they need, and maybe things that they want, talents and things that can help kids become empowered and become the leaders that they're supposed to become. One thing that I really, and I like that you keep going back to that, is the whole education piece. People have to understand what racism looks like and what discrimination looks like in order to process it and in order to fix this. And in order, especially for people of color, so that they don't blame themselves, especially for our young students of color that are in school so that they don't blame themselves and they can instead become empowered. So that all starts with education. You're right. We need to educate our students on what that looks like, what can be done. But that's missing right now
Right.
from our schools, and that's missing from our community.
Right.
So I feel like we need to make a collective effort as a community to make sure that our schools and our city are including everybody, and we do create a community of belonging. And that starts with education.
Right.
So we need to figure out as a community how we get that education to the community. What does that look like? Who gives that education to the community? Who's responsible for doing that? And I'd also like to see too, one thing that I've seen just being around in the community and being around different groups is that there's a lot of talk about these things, and everybody's on board with creating this environment of belonging, and that's great. We do want people on board, but then we need to move into action. So right now there's a lot of talking, which is great. That's step one. But now we need to start acting.
Right.
So if we're saying we need education, we need resources, then we need to actually start doing those things.
Right.
And so if we need to educate people, well, then let's do that. Let's figure out how to do that and how to make that work. So that not only it not only depends on our community members to do that, but it also depends on our leaders. Mm-hmm. Our leaders need to be held accountable, but they also need to be doing things that create belonging environments for everyone.
Right.
And I believe that our leaders are capable and smart enough to do that. And I believe that it's just a matter of action, putting these things and that are being talked about into action and making sure that there's resources behind those things so that the actions actually bring progress.
Right. And then when there's lack of resources, issues are born.
Exactly.
And that's why we see gun violence.
Yep.
That's why we see a lot of issues that are happening with our young people.
Right.
And the fact that they don't have support, they don't have resources, we don't have resources to provide with the necessary tools, education for them to feel safe and to feel like, okay, I belong in this community and it's my responsibility to be a part of it and to be a part of the work. Yes. I feel like there's pushbacks in a lot of areas. Yeah. And I agree that it's going to take a community. It's going to need all of us to work together. And when I'm doing the work, like just like by myself, like when I'm doing the work, I don't do the work just as Fisto. The fact that I'm working with Change for Concord, I'm doing it as a team. And I understand as a team to be able to succeed as Change for Concord, we need to work as a team. Meaning that the community to be able to create a safe space for our people, residents, young people, we need to work as a community. We need to engage as a community. We need to create a path for everybody to be a part of it and to feel that they belong in that area. So I agree with you. It's going to take a community. It's going to take everybody to be able to get to the point. And we've shared, like we've talked a lot. We've been talking a lot, and I think we need to move on and create something out of that and do something to make sure that we can end discrimination in our community and make sure that the city is a community, a space that people feel they belong and to feel like they have access to all the things they need and to thrive.
Right.
So.
Well, let me just touch back on the point you said about the school. The school does I feel like the school has these issues in mind, right? They have the idea that they want to create this community of belonging, and they're trying, and the conversations are started, and the systems are being put into place. But when you get out of school, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, when you get out of school, all of a sudden the resources for these types of issues and marginalized groups, they just tend to go away, especially in Concord. There's very few resources and paths and supports for these issues and these really important concepts that make people feel safe. And so and like you mentioned, I'm seeing this gap, right, between where kids are going in school and they're feeling like they belong, or, you know, they're really consciously trying to create an environment where kids feel like they belong. And then we're thrown out into our city where there, in my opinion, there's very little being done to create a community feeling of belonging.
Right.
Because like you said, we do have kids that are, you know, we have problems with violence. We have kids feeling like they, you know, maybe might be doing criminal activities or things that maybe aren't the best thing for them. And so if we really focus on creating that environment of belonging and making sure that everybody feels like they belong, it's not only better for those people that feeling like they don't belong, but it's better for the whole community in general.
Right.
Right? Which is what we want.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah.
It's about time. So
Oh.
I think we've covered a lot, and I hope this can be education to a lot of people in our community, and I hope that we can keep doing this
Yes.
and engage more people and have a conversation and actually do something do something about this. So with that being said, thank you so much for following us, watching this conversation, and we hope that you learned a lot about this, and we will see you next time. Thank you.